Hey, Erin, thank you for sitting down with us today. Happy to have you here. If you don't mind, I'd like to just get started with a little bit of a background on your story. If you could tell us, how you got here, how you became aware of the policies at your school.
Yeah, 4.5 years ago now, I was just a totally unsuspecting parent and sending my kid to public school. Like, I expect most parents assume you send your kid to school and they'll be safe and they'll be acting in the best interest of your family. But my daughter was really recruited or lured at the end of a school day, one regular Tuesday, to stay after school for an art club. And when she got there, it was actually Gender and Sexuality Awareness Club, or GSA. And the art teacher who had invited her to be there in the art room, told her it was an art club, had invited in this outside organization called Splash. And they, talked about if you're not fully comfortable in your body, that means you're transgender. And of course, my barely 12-year-old daughter in 2021 identified with that label. What 12-year-old girl's comfortable in her body? They talked
Hmm.
about sexual attraction when my daughter didn't know who she was attracted to. They said that means you're queer, and they did what I call glitter bombing. They celebrated her with flags and toys and stickers and adoration for adopting these new labels. They talked about explicit sexual concepts like polyamory. They repeatedly told the kids your parents might not be safe. You don't need to tell them about this meeting. In fact, the rule of art club was what you hear in here, keep in here, what you learn in here, share everywhere. So they really fostered this environment of don't tell your parents. And if you're not comfortable in your body, that means you're actually the wrong sex. And when my daughter left the room, her teacher even pulled her aside and said, "Remember, you don't have to tell your parents about this."
That's awful, but fortunately, she did tell you, correct?
She did come home and tell us. It was more of a like excitedly proclaiming that she's transgender boy now and she's going to change her name and cut her hair. And she was just all in on this really, I believe, a cult like mentality that she had been born wrong and that she was, something was fundamentally wrong with her and needed changing. And I think because they glitter bombed her, she thought that we were going to celebrate her in the same way. And so we were
Hmm.
all caught off guard when our initial reaction was, "No, you're not a boy." And oh my gosh, what happened to you at school? What's going on at school that we don't know about, that you are so far into this mentality that you've been born wrong?
And was this the first time she brought this up with you guys?
Yeah, so we had zero signs of gender dysphoria in the 12 years prior to this art club meeting. I realize now that they had been subtly indoctrinating her and encouraging secret keeping and introducing these explicit sexual concepts without our knowledge. But prior to that day of art club, we had no sign, and she had never brought up any discomfort in her body or in her sex.
No, and it sounds like despite all these things going on, you were fortunate in that your daughter did come to you and talk to you about these things and let you step in as parents to kind of take control of the situation.
Yeah, it was a long, hard year to pull our daughter out of this mentality that she was born wrong. And that included, severe spiral into depression, suicidal ideation. Every professional we turned to for help here in Colorado just made matters worse. We learned that counselors are legally obligated to affirm the confusion. We learned that the hard way. And so it was just a long, hard year for our family. And when we went public about what happened, we learned that there were so many other families like ours, not just in our school. There was a lot just in that classroom alone, but just all over the country, red and blue states alike. This is just such a pervasive issue. Kids being secretly transitioned behind parents' backs.
Yeah, it's certainly, unfortunately, not an isolated incident. So, as I said, you were lucky your daughter came and talked to you. What did you guys do with regard to the school after you found out your daughter comes and tells you all this and tells you, not only that she thinks she's a different gender, but also that the school is telling her to keep a secret. So it seems like kind of a twofold problem.
I cannot stress enough that that moment when our daughter came home and told us what had actually happened, that predators, these people talking about sexuality and keeping secrets and who are you attracted to and sexual positions and just really inappropriate things. I've never felt more violated in my entire life than that moment when I learned what they had done with my daughter and intentionally kept it a secret from us. And we were shocked and caught off guard, and we tried to do everything by the book. So we tried to keep calm, and we'll call the principal tomorrow, and then we'll go to the school board, and then we'll ask for a sit down with the superintendent, and we called the police because I feel like this was sexual abuse of our child, intentionally done in secret. And it's like every door was closed. It became so clear that they were proud of what they had done. This was intentionally in secret. We weren't supposed to find out about it. We actually, public record requests showed that they called us barriers need to be removed, that they discussed calling child protective services on our family because we objected and took our daughter out of the school. And at every turn it was like shock, like, wait, you see nothing wrong with what happened? This is horrible. This is happening to other kids and you're okay with it? The school district seemed to double and triple down at every turn.
It's scary that they weren't even willing to hear you out. Not even at going so far as admitting they were wrong, but shutting you down from the start is just the opposite of what you expect when you send your child to school. You think, like you said, they're going to be safe, they're at school. And if that kind of situation had happened anywhere else, like you said, you would call the police. It would be a predator situation. But somehow the school has this authority, or has claimed this authority, that they can, impart all this information and keep your child keeping secrets from you.
There was a lot of gaslighting that happened too. Early on we were just so unassuming and we expected that someone's going to have our back, and I think there was a lot of gaslighting that happened. They tried to appease us, like, "Oh, we'll look into that," and, "Oh yeah, let's review these materials that your child was given." But behind the scenes, what they were telling us is not what they were saying to each other behind the scenes. So I think for a while they really tried to appease us and gaslight us, and in my opinion keep us quiet, prevent us from being public like we are now about what they were doing, because they knew what was wrong. They weren't just lying to our child, they were then lying to us in the aftermath.
Yeah, perpetuating the bad behavior. So it sounds like, their lack of remorse or any willingness to change led you to maybe realize that you needed to go public. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was actually twofold. So one of the police officers I talked to early on said, "Look, I don't see a way to hold the people in the classroom accountable with my authority. But if I were you, I would get loud and I would tell other parents what's happening because they deserve to know. You were caught off guard, and that's not fair. That shouldn't have happened. You need to tell other people." And so that definitely encouraged me. But then it was then about a year later when my daughter started to come out of that cloud of confusion, we finally helped her through it, that she actually asked us to speak up. She said, "Why didn't I understand this was happening to me when it was happening?" And I said, "Well, they took advantage of you." And she goes, "How do I make sure this doesn't happen to other little girls?" And that was the moment. It was like a light bulb. It was like, I have to scream this from the rooftops. She wants me to. She wants us to make sure other little girls don't suffer in the way that we have as a family, and the way that she has. And so really she was our motivation to speak up and get loud.
It's incredible, very admirable too. People who are adults who are victims don't have that kind of courage and conviction. So it's wonderful that she's been able to make as much positivity out of this as possible. So when you first went public, you were getting loud. How did you decide to go from, publicizing social media into the litigation?
Well, it was kind of a whirlwind for us. I talked to one friend who talked to a journalist, and then like the next week I was on Glenn Beck, and it was overwhelming for a mom, especially a mom who was not a conservative. Prior to this happening, I didn't really know who Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson were, but in doing that, so many families came forward, and that's when, especially the other families who were part of initiating this lawsuit, the other family who's on it with us, it was like we've all been hurt. This is a pattern. They are doing it even after parents are raising concern. There is so many kids being harmed in the wake of what this school district is doing, what they believe is the best interest of our kids. And it was a no-brainer. I mean, we knew we had to hold them legally accountable, because following all the right channels didn't work. None of them worked. And that just seemed like our only option at that point.
Right. And I think it's interesting, that you point out that you weren't a conservative beforehand, that those were the outlets that were available to you. But really, it's not a political question. It's about your right as a parent to raise your child and to be involved in her upbringing, right? And to not have the school district come in and tell you, no, you don't actually know what's right for your daughter. We do.
Yeah.
Right. And so it kind of transcends any kind of politics, and it goes into that core aspect of just parental rights and raising your own children.
Well, and it's so important to point out that parental rights and responsibility and authority are God-given. They are inalienable. Yes, our Constitution protects them, and so they are therefore constitutional rights, but really those rights come from God and they are protected by law. And so people go, "You're fighting for our, our legal rights." It's like, "Yes, but really those are your inalienable God-given rights that we now have to ensure are protected through this law, through litigation and laws."
Right, exactly. And so that's where AFPI got involved. And we represent you and another family. We filed our suit in the District of Colorado alleging violation of these inalienable parental rights. And it's been a fight ever since then. We've lost and lost again, but we won't give up because it's really, as you said, it's pervasive across the country. Kids are being subjected to these things and their parents have no idea. So when parents don't know what's going on, how can they exercise these rights? So what we did was we brought that lawsuit in Colorado. We've been trying to amend it and still getting struck down by the courts. So we went to the 10th Circuit. We had oral arguments there. We presented all of our arguments supporting the constitutional and God-given inalienable parental rights and have still faced barriers, right? So what we've done this summer is filed a petition with the Supreme Court, hoping that they'll hear our case. The court just earlier this summer came out ruling in favor of parental rights with respect to religion, right? So now we're trying to get the court to go a little bit past that, right? We want to say we do have firmly held religious beliefs, but it's beyond that. It's about parents and their rights to make decisions to raise their kids, right?
And we are both religious families of different religious backgrounds, but that's not the basis here. All parents, regardless of their religious background, their deeply held beliefs should be the ones that guide their family. That's not the government's right to usurp that right from us. And I don't think our founding fathers could have even fathomed the need to put it explicitly in the Constitution, parental rights. I mean, it's in the Ten Commandments, but I think they're rolling in their grave at the thought that they weren't more explicit. And the courts are going to have to decide this kind of a gray area that schools have been able to operate in and define once and for all what are parental rights. Do we have the right to raise our kids and not the government?
And that's something that we raise in our petition. We point to the founding and the influence of God and of other thinkers and philosophers on the founding of this country. And it was founded on parents and the family, and parents were primarily responsible for that. And you said it earlier, it's a parental right, but it's also a responsibility, an obligation, a duty, right? To bring children into this world, but then raise them and impart in them the knowledge they need to be, successful, contributing members of our society. And we don't want the government to be in charge of deciding what that looks like, right? That's part of what all families, like you said, you guys have different religious beliefs, but you're still all with the same parental rights there.
AFPI has been such a blessing in this. It's not, as you said, this has become a politicized topic, but it's not political. These are fundamental rights. This is a moral issue, and it's not a popular issue to take on because there was no precedent leading up to this. This is a new issue that we have now found ourselves in, but it is so important for the sake of thousands and thousands of families who are going through this because this is so ubiquitous all over the country that we just define once and for all, what is a parent.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. So what would you say, let's talk a little bit more about like practically what do those changes look like, right? What do we say? We want schools to have parents involved. We don't want schools or school districts to be making decisions about raising kids. So what, in your opinion, do you think it looks like to see those changes on the ground, to change those policies, to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think parents just have a right to know what's happening, and this intentional secret keeping needs to stop. There must be policy in place that parents will be informed when their child will be exposed to gender ideology, sexuality, anything that goes against our deeply held beliefs. We have a right to know what's happening. And so, in some cases, people will argue, well, FERPA, you have a right to look at your child's records. But if we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, we don't know what's happening in those counseling sessions, in these club meetings, we don't know to intervene or to request our child's chosen name. And so there just needs to be policy in place that parents will be informed that these conversations are happening.
Right. It almost puts you in a lose-lose because they won't tell you the child's requested name, but you also don't know to ask about it. So you can't do anything if you don't have any information.
And I can just say, having, talked to so many families over the last 3 years or 3+ years now since we went public, that this is always detrimental to the child. There is never a situation we're bullied with this, what I call the suicide myth, that if you tell a parent that the child is transgender, then the parent will react negatively and the child will be suicidal. Or if you don't transition a child, the only other option is suicide. It's like transition or die is basically this position that parents are put into. And, we just have to know that it's happening so that we can intervene for our kids, because 100% of the time they are not happier. They are not better off as a result of being told they were born in the wrong body or being encouraged to keep secrets from parents. It's just imperative that we can have open communication with our kids. That, to me, the secrecy is almost more egregious than the secret transition of my child, because how detrimental to tell a child that they can't touch their parents or that they should keep secrets from parents. That has such far-reaching ramifications that hurt that parent-child relationship for years to come. The damage that does to a child, I know because I've experienced it, is so hard to come back from.
Absolutely. I was going to ask about that. The secrecy piece is I agree, almost more detrimental because you're really interfering with the family unit as a whole. You're saying here are parents, here are the children, the parents have the kids' best interest at heart. And now you have a school who's a teacher's also a trustworthy authority figure, especially to an elementary school or a middle school child. They see a teacher as someone on par with a parent who's an adult, who they should respect, who they should listen to. And when you're getting that conflicting information from that kind of trusted adult saying, your mom probably can't handle this, or you shouldn't tell her, that goes beyond the gender identity issue. That makes them then question, right? Well, what else can I not tell her about? If I can't trust her with this, are there other things that I should be keeping a secret? And you're right. It just kind of continues to drive that wedge in the whole family unit.
Well, I don't believe that someone else can identify as a trusted adult to someone else's kid. What gives them that authority to automatically assume that they're trusted? And as we've seen with the school district that we are suing in this situation, there continues to be people arrested for inappropriate sexual behavior with a child, counselors, paraprofessionals, teachers, so many accounts of sexual abuse. And it shouldn't be surprising in a district that identifies everyone as a trusted adult and fosters the secret of sexualizing kids and secret keeping. It's awful to think how far this could have gone with my daughter and how lucky we are to have gotten her off the conveyor belt before it went that far. But I feel for all the kids and now young adults who are reeling from the damage of being sexually abused by adults in this school district.
Yeah, I agree. It's really scary. And I think that's, it's important. It's like you said at the beginning, it's part of why your daughter wanted to speak out, that we need to make noise about this, that it's about protecting children. I want to talk about just a little bit where our case is now. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been struck down a couple times in the lower courts, but we're hoping that the Supreme Court's going to take our case. We've got probably a few weeks at least until we'll hear about that. But I just wanted to go through, if they take our case, what we'll do next, and if they don't, right? So hopefully, fingers crossed, they take our case. And that will involve a whole second round now of briefing and oral arguments. So we'll submit briefs. The school district will submit briefs. We'll request amicus briefs from friendly organizations and groups as we have supporting our petition. And then once those briefs are all submitted, we'll have an oral argument in front of the Supreme Court, which would be very, very exciting for us, for the movement, for the protection of children. And like you said, hopefully that results in a ruling in our favor, which would start to really limit these ability of these schools to get away with having these kind of policies that exclude parents and that are doing these secret transitions, right? But there's always still the chance that our case doesn't get taken, right? The Supreme Court has discretion. They take very few cases out of all the petitions that they hear every year. So maybe they don't take our case, but in my opinion, and I'm sure yours as well, that doesn't mean the fight ends, right? You know, there are lots more cases that are pending. That's something that we actually noted in our petition, asking the court to take this case, saying that, look, we're not the only ones out there. We're not the only representing the only parents who are suing a school district over this. It's a pervasive issue. Schools are really starting to overstep more and more. And so if our case doesn't get taken, that just means we have to continue advocating in other cases, in other arenas, be public, be loud as much as possible, right?
And I have to say, from like boots on the ground with parents, there are over a dozen cases like ours being heard all around the
Mm-hmm.
country. But that is such a small representation. Like, you know, the work that it takes to get to this point. For there to be 4 cases being appealed to the Supreme Court at the same time on
Mm-hmm.
secret school transition, what we had to go through to get here, there are so many families, most of them, who are just trying to protect their kid. They're just trying to get their kids out of this cult-like mentality that they were born wrong. They're just trying to keep their family together, trying to keep the lights on. Most people are not in a position to pursue a lawsuit like we have. And that's why what we're doing is so important, because we have so many parents, really the rights of every parent in America, resting on our shoulders. In this case, and like you said, if they don't take it, then the fight continues, and we will support those other suits that are working their way through the system.
Yes, absolutely. It's a fight worth having, and it's a fight worth staying in until the bitter end, or hopefully the successful end. Um, just to wrap up, really, is there anything else, you know, that you really want out there, that you really want people to know about the importance of this case, about the importance of this issue, the role of parents in schools?
You know, one thing I didn't touch on is the other family who's on our lawsuit. They are one of those families who's not a mouthpiece like I am for the issue of parental rights. They're just a private, very quiet, very reserved family who was harmed by this.
Mm,
And I think it's important to point out that their daughter kept the secret. So my daughter came home and immediately told us what was happening. But their
mhm,
daughter kept the secret for a whole year until we went public, and those parents saw me on TV and went, "Oh, wait a minute, were you in that club?" Because their daughter
mhm,
had spiraled. She tried every identity. She was, you know, non-binary and queer and asexual and pansexual and transgender. And she tried every one of those LGBTQ plus identities.
options.
Yes, and then ultimately attempted suicide, drank bleach, was in the hospital. And at that point, her parents were going, "What did we do wrong? Where is this coming from? Why is she so confused? Where are these identities coming from? What could we have done differently?" They had no idea. And I can't imagine going that whole year to then find out what had been happening with their daughter behind their back. I was violated from one visit. To know that that had been going on for a whole year behind their back, it like gives me goosebumps and makes me want to just cry when I think about it, because I remember meeting that family as they were piecing it together in their heads, like, "Oh, that's why she was keeping this secret." And, "Oh, well, they said it was anime club, it really wasn't, was it?" And just watching them go through those emotions of realizing how they'd been deceived and lied to, and why their daughter's almost death was on the really, that blood was on the hands of the school district. I just want to highlight their involvement in this situation, because they're not public like I am, but what they went through is arguably worse than what we did as a family.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example of how bad things can get. And it's just I see the irony in it also, because one of the arguments we often hear is that these kind of policies are meant to protect transgender identifying students, and that they're there so that they're not discriminated against, or that they have a safe space. And they acknowledge all the mental trauma and suicide and all these other things that can really impact students who are questioning their gender, and then they exclude the parents. And it just seems to be so contradictory that if you're trying to help a student who's going through something, why wouldn't you want to then also include their parents to get all hands on deck, as many people on board, so that these students have as much support as possible? Instead, it's almost like they're identifying them and they're saying, no, 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 you feel this way because you're trans and we have to keep it a secret. And so it almost defies logic when you really kind of think about it that way. That this little girl could have really benefited from having her parents involved in everything that she was going through and maybe wouldn't have had to get to the point where she tried suicide.
Yeah. It really feels to me like parents are being branded guilty until proven innocent. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's the way it's supposed to go. Parents should be assumed fit unless they are indicators otherwise. And schools, as mandated reporters, are obligated to report a parent who is not fit. And so this whole argument that, a parent could be abusive, it just doesn't fit in this
Yeah.
scenario. We are not guilty until proven innocent. We are the parent.
Right. Well, and also that assignment of, if you're not completely 100% supportive of gender identity issues, then you are somehow unfit. And as far as I'm aware, that's not the law. That's not what courts have said. That's not what the Constitution says. And it's really, really disheartening. So it's been an honor for us here to work with you and to be in this fight.
We're going to win one way or another.
Yes, exactly. Where victory is the only option. So, as someone on the front lines, as someone who's been in this fight for a number of years now, what advice do you have for parents? What advice do you have for people who are out there and are just assuming that their kids are going to school and that they're fine and that these things aren't happening? Or people who find out that these things are happening? What can they do? How can they get involved? How can they protect their kids?
Yeah, my general advice to parents is to just be aware that government schools aren't what we think they are and that we have options as parents. My kids are now in private, charter, and homeschool because we don't trust the public school district. And so I wish someone had informed me of what was happening, to pay attention, be more involved, teach your kids to be really open with you. If someone teaches you to keep a secret, they're not safe, you should tell me
Mhm.
what has happened. And we've armed our younger kids with that empowerment, really, to know that if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, and you have the authority to leave. And if someone asks you to keep a secret, you should tell us that person asked you to keep a secret. And so that's my general advice for parents. But for anyone who's going through this, that their child is gender confused, my advice is usually, and I've helped thousands of parents through this, is to be drastic, to remove all the negative influences, the school, the internet, the toxic friendships, the video game chats, and replace them with positive ones, more family time, youth group, positive hobbies, getting outside, art. My husband and my daughter went on daddy-daughter dates once a week, and that was a huge part of her healing journey. And so just remove the negative influences, replace them with positive ones. And for all parents, band together. There's strength in numbers. You don't feel like you're alone on an island. I did. When this happened, I thought I was the only one in the whole world. And then when I stepped out on a ledge and said out loud what had happened to me, I learned that there was so much support. Parent groups, people who want to just step in and support us and our family. And, there's so many opportunities for us just to band together as parents, to educate each other and to push back when something like this happens.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today, Erin.